Today we're gonna look at the meaning of the Barbie movie. We've created a narrative for this movie that I think could use a little work. I've looked at the interpretations of both sides of the political spectrum, and most reviews seem to only take into account half the story. So I'd like to break down where I think we've gone wrong, and then look at a few insights from one of the people who made the movie to get us a little bit closer to the meaning it was trying to communicate. My name is Kyle J. Shower, and welcome to The Kyle J. Show. The Barbie movie was released on July 21st, 2023. And here we are almost 8 months later still talking about it. I can't remember the last time we talked about a movie this much. Whether you loved it, you hated it, it got the world's attention. And actually, I think the people who hated it talked about it more than anybody else. And typically, if you got a lot of haters, you're either doing something very right or very wrong. All this conversation surrounding it shows that at the very least the movie was thought-provoking. And I finally decided to enter myself into this conversation because listening to most of your conversations, I couldn't help but wonder, did we watch the same thing? Did everyone miss the part of the movie addressing the existential dread that plagues humanity? I've tried to bring it up to people and they just look at me, well, like how they looked at Barbie. For a second there, I thought maybe I was crazy. I don't know, maybe the edible hit me a little too hard in the movie theater and I hallucinated my own existential dread and projected it into the plot of the Barbie movie. But then I rewatched it, and there it was again!
Here I come.
I think most people can agree it wasn't any kind of cinematic masterpiece. And there are plenty of channels you could go to that will critique the movie in that way. But I'm not a movie critic, I'm a meaning critic. My channel is dedicated to looking at what things mean. So I went around and talked to some people, read a bunch of reviews online, just to see what everyone thought it was about. And almost everyone said it was about feminism, the patriarchy, or something along those lines.
The point of the film is that the matriarchy is amazing. Women are amazing at everything.
It seemed like that was the only thing people really got out of the movie. All the existential aspects of it were either overshadowed or just completely ignored. Now, there are times where we can take one aspect of something and analyze the meaning of it, but if we're gonna look at the central meaning for the entirety of the Barbie movie, I think we have to look at the entirety of events included in the story. It appears that most people in their own mind have separated the Barbie movie into having two distinct narratives. One narrative that speaks on women empowerment, feminism, gender roles. Let's call that one the social narrative. And then another narrative that speaks on death, human limitation, and the meaning of life. And let's call that one the existential narrative. Throughout the movie, we see a series of events that addresses both topics. So let's start by looking at the movie and breaking down the key events for both the social and the existential narrative. We'll start at the very top of the movie.
Spoiler alert.
It begins explaining the relationship between girls and their dolls. The narrator explains that for all of human existence, girls have played with dolls that were babies. The baby dolls were essentially there to teach women at a young age that their role in society was to be a mother. Only a mother.
The girls who played with them could only ever play at being mothers.
Then, with the epic Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Barbie comes along. And rather than having little girls imagine themselves in a predetermined role in society, Barbie allows them to imagine themselves in whatever role they want.
Because Barbie can be anything, women can be anything.
Now pause for a second. When looking at what something means, you gotta start with looking at the symbols. What are they trying to represent with this or that? But in this case, we don't have to look too deeply at the symbols, because right at the top, they explicitly tell us what the symbol of Barbie is meant to represent. As a side note, I also want to mention that I love the way they explain how symbols move from something in the imaginary world to the real world. I thought it was simple, easy to understand, and I will definitely be using this as an example in future videos about symbols. But anyways, the introduction sets us up with the social narrative of the movie. We know this movie is going to have some commentary on the role that women play in society. And this narrative continues as we move to the next scene in the Barbie world, where women take on every role in society. They're politicians, lawyers, Nobel Prize winners, construction workers. They can do it all. On the other hand, the Kens of the world are just there beaching each other off. Every night, the Barbies have this big dance party, and in the middle of their dance break, Barbie asks a forbidden question.
Do you guys ever think about dying?
The first time I watched this, I really thought they were just throwing in some random dark humor. Felt just a little out of pocket with the happy Barbie vibes, but like I thought that was the whole joke. And then when Barbie's going to bed, she brings it up again.
Good night, Barbies. I'm definitely not thinking about death anymore.
Now I'm thinking, okay, that's weird. They brought it up twice. Is existential dread gonna be another theme in this movie? And as it turns out, this was all the setup for the existential narrative. So not only are they trying to tackle the issue of women's role in society, but they're also going to tackle the issue of dying? They're trying to be the next Simone de Beauvoir or some shit.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
So the next day, Barbie wakes up and starts malfunctioning. AKA, she starts being more like a human with flaws, and she gets her first taste of experiencing imperfection. So to figure out what's going on, she visits Weird Barbie, who's like an oracle or something. And she's told that there's been a portal that's opened between the real world and the Barbie world. And she's gotta go find the girl who's messing things up in the real world and fix things. Yada yada, they do this whole Matrix red pill, blue pill thing. So now she goes to the real world and Ken ends up tagging along, and the movie jumps back to the social narrative. In the real world, innocent, perfect Barbie gets a dose of literal reality and is exposed to some nastiness. Debauchery, if you will. The men in reality stare. They laugh, catcall. She gets sexually assaulted both physically and verbally. Ken, on the other hand, of course, is amazed at all the attention he's getting. Thus spoke Zarathustra, that played at the beginning of the movie when Barbie was introduced to little girls, is played now as Ken is walking through reality, noticing all the roles that men have in the real world. Once again, I think the social commentary here is made very clear. Whether you feel it's exaggerated or not, they get the point across and depict the sharp contrast of experience of men in the real world versus women in the real world. While Ken is off doing his thing, Barbie sits on a bench and searches through her mind for the girl she's looking for in the real world. If I was a movie critic, I'd say that the magic system in this shit makes no sense, but that's not my thing. While she's searching through her mind, we jump back to the existential narrative. In her mind, she sees a relationship unfold between a mother and a daughter. She sees all the emotional ups and downs, and for the first time, we see Barbie shed a tear and experience real human emotion. This new experience seems to broaden her perspective of life, and she looks around taking in all the various experiences that come along with being human. People laughing, arguing, children playing, this one sad guy sitting by himself, and trees. Lots of trees. Then in one of my personal favorite parts of the whole movie, she turns to this old lady sitting on the bench beside her and calls her beautiful. As far as we know, Barbie has never seen an old person before. She doesn't know what it means to age. And as she looks into the eyes of this woman depicting the temporary, the finite, the limited aspects of humanity, Barbie affirms it as being beautiful.
You're so beautiful.
After this, the middle of the movie doesn't necessarily have anything to add significant to the narratives, so I'm gonna just get through this part. Barbie finds the little girl she's looking for, and it turns out she's kind of an asshole. And then she has this super cringe fascist speech.
I hadn't thought about you in years, you fascist.
Though I will say I did think it was interesting they didn't shy away from acknowledging some of the negative effects Barbie has had on the real world. Barbie is then captured by Mattel, whose board of directors happens to be all male. A little more social commentary. She escapes, and the mom and daughter from her vision thing come and save her. The big twist is revealed that she's actually the mother's toy and not the little girl's toy.
I came for you!
So then all of them go back to the Barbie world to escape Mattel's board of directors that's following them. Lots of plot holes here. Like I said, not a cinematic masterpiece. But I'm not here doing a critique, we're just analyzing the narratives. When we get back to Barbie World, both the social narrative and the existential narrative are confronted with the main conflict of the story. It starts off with the social narrative. While Barbie was captured, Ken came back to the Barbie world and instated the patriarchy. A true patriarchy.
Everything exists to expand and elevate the presence of men.
All the Barbies have been brainwashed and are now subservient to the Kens. When Barbie tries to confront Ken about it, he shuts that shit down. He's on that red pill, that MGTOW. He's an alpha male.
Every night is boys' night.
Barbie is then overwhelmed with so much emotion, we see the central conflict of the existential narrative. The imperfection of humanity has plagued Barbie Land, and she has to deal with difficult change for the first time in her life.
I've never wanted anything to change.
Oh, honey, that's life. It's all change.
Despite the mother and daughter trying to convince her to stand up and fight, she lays down, gives up, and becomes Depression Barbie. Weird Barbie then comes out of the shadows and takes our Barbie back to her lair. The mother and daughter show back up to try and console Barbie, and the social narrative comes to its climax with the mother's viral speech.
You have to be a boss, but you can't be mean. You have to lead, but you can't squash other people's ideas.
This family really loves their speeches, I guess. Anyways, in bringing to light the difficult experiences of being a woman, she's able to snap the Barbies out of their brainwashed state. So they put together this whole plan to take Barbie world back into their own hands, starting with unbrainwashing all the Barbies, and then after that, they go for the Kens. And as I'm watching this, it starts to look oddly familiar, like I've seen this somewhere before. And then it hits me. Oh my God. They're resolving the social narrative by using the dentist system!
Demonstrate value.
You can tell them that you've never seen The Godfather and that you'd love them to explain it to you.
Engage physically.
Please?
Nurturing dependence.
And I don't know if I've ever been real love.
Neglect emotionally.
And at the peak of their happiness, when they think you actually care about this song, you take it all away.
Inspire hope.
I think I owe you an apology.
Huh?
I'm really sorry I took you for granted.
Oh.
Separate entirely.
I'm not in love with Ken.
D-E-N-N-I-S. The dentist system.
So yeah, they did that. And their plan worked. It made the Kens go to war, and they took back their world and restored Barbie Land to the way it once was. However, they learned their lesson from this whole conflict, and will now begin to involve Kens in everyday Barbie world matters.
Please may the Kens have one Supreme Court justice.
Oh, I can't do that. But maybe a lower circuit court judgeship.
We accept.
For most people, I feel like this is where the movie ended, or at least maybe where they wanted it to end. They've resolved the social narrative, but they still have to resolve the existential narrative. And to do this, Barbie's creator shows up and takes her to some place like purgatory, some other dimension or world. I don't know where the hell they're at. Here, Barbie contemplates whether or not she wants to become a human. And the creator warns her that if she says yes, it will include things like uncomfortability and death.
And then you die.
She even continues to point out that in trying to deal with the difficulties of life, sometimes humans create things that have flaws, like the patriarchy. Despite all this, Barbie decides to say yes to her humanity.
I want to be a part of the people that make meaning, not the thing that's made. I want to do the imagining. I don't want to be the idea.
With this, they conclude the existential narrative. Despite all the uncomfortability, limitation, and imperfection, our ability to make meaning leads Barbie to say yes to life and become human. Now, I might be a little biased because I did create a show that's dedicated to looking at what things mean, but that's a beautiful message that I don't see anyone talking about. What the f***? Consciously or unconsciously, it seems we ignored the existential narrative, and this leaves the movie into having these two split meanings. One addressing the social issues, and another addressing the existential issues. And let's be honest, the social narrative makes for a much more culturally relevant and interesting conversation. So no wonder that's all you hear people talk about. So why would they even include the existential narrative? All it seemed to do was take away from the social issue. It really felt like there was some conflict going on in the writer's room. One writer wanted this movie to be about women in society, and another writer wanted this movie to be about the human condition. And then we just watched a war break out between the writers from the two narratives that were in constant competition throughout the movie. In fact, this video was originally gonna be about the war between the social narrative and the existential narrative. But then I took a second and paused.
6.5 hours later.
Maybe there's something we're missing by splitting the movie into two narratives like this. If you're like me, maybe your biases made you unconsciously split the movie that way so that you could get it to mean what you wanted it to mean. Maybe there's a reason the writers tackled both these issues at the same time. Maybe there's a singular, more cohesive narrative the writers wanted us to take home. In an interview with Greta Gerwig, the director, and Margot Robbie, Gerwig says exactly what she wanted us to take away from the movie.
That however anarchic or crazy or throwing elbows the movie was, that the thing that you walk away with was this feeling of this heart in the middle of it.
Heart. She wants us to feel the heart. She goes on to say that this movie has love for people, not just for women. Now, for those of you who might not have felt the heart in this movie, which apparently was a lot of you, I'd like to go back and look at these narratives and try and steel man. No.
Watch this, I'm gonna be so woke right now.
Steelwoman, the meaning behind the Barbie movie. In doing this, I want to make it clear I am not taking a side on any political matter. There is so much commentary out there of people going through everything they hated about the movie. I'm just taking the opposite approach. I want to explore the movie and find a meaning that I could actually learn and benefit from. And my goal is to do that in a way that does justice to the writers. As we revisit the two narratives to try and find a more cohesive narrative that speaks to the heart that Greta Gerwig is talking about, I'd like to refer to a few other comments in the interview and look at the movie from the perspective of the people who actually made the movie.
She exists in the both and, not the either or. She's not either good or bad.
Our current state of cinema pop culture is full of movies where there's good guys and then there's bad guys. But in this movie, none of the characters were purely good or purely evil. I mean, at the beginning of the movie, Barbie herself was not a good person to Ken. She legit neglected the dude who was supposed to be her boyfriend. That relationship was kinda toxic. Will Ferrell's character was kinda weird too, because in one instance he's shown to be this evil, greedy capitalist, and in another instance he's shown to have a lot of care for the Barbies.
Well, I got into this business because of little girls and their dreams, in the least creepy way possible.
The closest thing we had to a bad guy was Ken. And even then, they really didn't make him out to be a bad person. He just had a moment where he got a little too consumed with the idea of the patriarchy. And at the end, he was fully redeemed and ended up being a lot of people's favorite character. The main characters in the movie weren't bad people, they just had bad ideas. This runs very contrary to all those people who thought the movie was just saying that all men are bad and all women are good.
Women are simply amazing, and men and everything they do are utterly irredeemably shit.
I don't know, maybe there was a few scenes that gave off that vibe, but I don't think that's anywhere near what the overarching message was. Considering how nuanced all the characters were, it's hard for me to take away a message that says all men are pure evil and all women are pure good. It was whatever idea they held that resulted in their actions being good or bad. Here's another clip from that same interview.
It's feminist in a way that includes everyone.
Feminist in a way that includes everyone. I already hear some of you on the other side of the screen going, what the f does that mean? Well, let's at least try and make sense of it. How can something be feminist, yet include everyone? Well, one of the things I observed in the movie was that whenever they addressed the social narrative, it was always immediately followed up with the existential narrative. In fact, the final conclusion of the movie was not directed at addressing women in the patriarchy, it was addressing Barbie's humanity.
It's also a humanist film.
Yes, the film was unapologetically feminist, but the feminism was always bound up in an overarching theme of humanism. You'd think that a movie that's so explicitly feminist would make their critiques on society and be done with it. They could have made the patriarchy be the ultimate evil, the bad idea that turns good people into bad people. But instead of pointing to the patriarchy as the cause of all women's suffering, they acknowledge that a part of life itself is suffering. And the patriarchy is just one of those things in life that we could work on to make things a little less worse for 50% of the population. They went the extra mile to include the idea that the flaws of our society are derived from the flaws of being human. One of the leading philosophers in today's world, Slavoj Žižek, talked about the philosophy of Barbie and pointed out this exact idea.
Usually traditional Marxists or other leftists like to point out how all these fantasy worlds like the Barbie world, not our ordinary world, are just something that are ideological distortion, reflection, ideal, imagined supplement to our actual world.
I've listened to and read a lot of Žižek over the years, and I've probably only understood like 10% of it. But I'll do my best to explain what he's saying here and how it relates to what I'm talking about, without getting too into all the different schools of thought like Marxism, postmodernism, or whatever. In the big conclusion of the movie, Barbie's creator explained that to deal with the uncomfortability of life, we humans create things like patriarchy or Barbie. Žižek calls all these things illusions. They're made up realities realities. And of course, because humans made them, they're flawed. Zizek critiques a very common idea that says if we just got rid of all these made-up realities, we could have a true reality that isn't flawed. To him, many modern progressive movements are too idealistic. They create this false hope that if we just got rid of X, Y, and Z, we'd have a perfect, comfortable, utopian existence. Instead, he'd say that yes, the flaws in our system are very real, but no matter what system we create, be it political, economic, social, it will always be flawed. It will never be perfect because imperfection is knitted into the fabric of our reality.
It's an illusion which is written into the texture of our reality itself.
It's disappointing that almost no one's giving credit to the movie for including this very hard but very real message. I don't know, maybe it's too tough of a pill to swallow. Maybe we ignored the existential anxiety Barbie experienced because we're ignoring the existential anxiety we're experiencing in ourselves. Ever think about that? Dealing with the trauma of people abusing their position of power is something we could do about. But dealing with the trauma of an imperfect existence is something you can't do anything about. You just have to accept it. This movie throws both of these traumas right at you, and it appears that we're only ready to face one of them. Maybe we all need to take a page out of Barbie's book since she was able to face both of them. Throughout the movie, we watch Barbie come to grips with the fact that being human means being imperfect. We watch her experience pain, emotions, change, hardships, all things that we have to deal with as humans. And rather than choosing to go back to the life of perfection in her Barbie world, she chooses the life of imperfection in the real world. As a part of becoming human, Barbie is accepting imperfection.
Diving into the complexity of it and not running away from it, but like looking at all the thorniness and stepping into it, and also looking at all the thorniness and stepping into what is the negotiation of what women need to be.
Accepting imperfection does not mean rolling over and giving up. Accepting imperfection, in the words of Greta Gerwig, means looking at all the thorniness and stepping into it. This movie stepped into the thorniness of the patriarchy. And seeing how you all reacted to it, it is still very thorny, especially for you, political types. The movie doesn't shy away from painting the patriarchy as being one of those bad ideas. But while it tackles the issue of women's role in society, it understands that the issue is something we're always gonna have to be constantly negotiating. They hold two ideas simultaneously. One, reality is flawed and will never be perfect. And two, the aspects of reality that are flawed can be worked on and improved. These two are not mutually exclusive, but when you split the movie into having two meanings, a social narrative and an existential narrative, you create two incomplete narratives. And if you only take one aspect of something and break down all its flaws, well, that's literally the definition of straw woman. To have one all-encompassing narrative, we have to let the social aspect and the existential aspect work together, just like they do in the movie. When you hold the two in tandem, you get this idea that although we're never going to be perfect, we can strive to make the world a better place. And to those who think I'm being overly generous with my analysis, well, they said this almost exactly in the movie.
You have to try. Even if you can't make it perfect, you can make it better.
In the end, Barbie chooses life as a human because although we have bad ideas, we can also create good ideas. And we can even take a bad idea and turn it into a good idea. Might I remind you of her closing remark?
I want to do the imagining. I don't want to be the idea.
Barbie recognized that the beauty of being human is the ability we have to make meaning, imagine, create ideas, all of which have the power to make the world a better place. I will now proceed to be deep as
Cringe warning.
Because this aspect of humanity that Barbie identified is an observation that's been written about by some of the greatest philosophers and spiritual teachers for centuries. Some call this the aspect of us which is divine. It's a central theme in religions everywhere and akin to the idea of logos. Okay, I'm done. However deep or not deep this ending was intended to be, taking into account everything we've discussed, I think we can begin to see the heart that Greta Gerwig wanted the audience to take home with them. The characters that represented societal roles of men and women in the real world were not depicted as a fight between good guys versus bad guys. Instead, the characters' good or bad actions were determined based on the internal struggle between themselves and the ideas that consume them. The central theme didn't stop at feminism. It didn't pretend that solving the patriarchy would solve all women's problems. Instead, it identified that the ultimate flaw is in life itself. And then to wrap it all up, they chose to leave us with a message that accepts all the good and bad that life life has to offer. And all the bad is worth enduring because we have this unique ability to make, create, and imagine things that leave our world better than how we found it. Now that we've taken all the events into account and looked at it through the perspective of the writer and director herself, I think we can put together a narrative that comes a little closer to what the movie was trying to communicate. If it were me, I'd say that this movie is about recognizing that humanity is flawed and it creates systems that have hurt people. Women in particular have experienced a lot of suffering and inequality because of one of these systems. Despite all this, humanity has the ability to step into the imperfections of life and create a better world. I don't know, let me know what you think of that in the comments below. I'm sure my nuanced take on the meaning of the Barbie movie will be received with open arms. I mean, even though it was a Steelwoman, I felt like I was being pretty fair in assessing the content and finding the cohesion in the entirety of the movie. Let me know where you agree, disagree, or if you felt I overstated or understated anything, or if you just thought everything I said was a pile of shit. Since you made it this far, it'd be greatly appreciated if you took a moment to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. If you watched my first two videos on narratives and symbols, this episode gave a pretty good example of how you can practically apply those two concepts when looking at what things mean. At first, it actually wasn't intentional, and then halfway through creating the video, I realized that I was just going through the whole narrative process. I was looking at the story of the Barbie movie and breaking down the events that we identified to come up with our popular narrative. And then I got into this kind of dialogue by looking at the interview with Greta Gerwig, where she gave her perspective on the movie, and that led us to having this new and hopefully improved narrative. And the whole movie was about the symbol of Barbie. It was very explicit. And actually that was something I didn't personally care much for. I like my symbols a little more open-ended, a little more open to discussion. And if you like this approach and you like this topic, let me know, because I got more ideas like this to share.